Alrighty, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. One of the big stories making headlines is the news that Fort Sill, the Army base here in Oklahoma, is going to be housing some 1,400 migrant children. I know you've already reacted a little bit on Twitter, but what is your reaction to this news?
Well, this is not the first time that Fort Sill in Oklahoma have been asked to house kids. I think this is a temporary process. I understand it's a key to making sure we address the needs of those kids who are coming across on the border, but ultimately we've got to find a way to get them back home to their families where they came from in a prompt fashion. But right now, once again, Fort Sill, the Lawton area, will be asked to address the needs of some children who can't take care of themselves.
How are we going to make sure that those needs are properly addressed? Of course, we know some children have died in U.S. custody in these holding facilities, and they're not really under the purview of DHS because they're emergency temporary shelters. So what can we do to make sure that they're properly cared for?
Well, I would tell you one of the most important things is to make sure that we have the necessary funds appropriated in the accounts so that the federal agencies that are responsible can meet those needs. That's been one of the frustrations of those of us on the Republican side of the United States House, is because earlier this year we wanted to put money into the disaster bill to try, the supplementals to try and address this issue. The leadership here in the House chose not to. Now we're coming up on a situation where we're going to run out of money, and what's going to happen? Those kids have to be taken care of. It's not their fault that they're here. They've got to be taken care of and taken care of properly, and then we've got to address the border issue so we can get them back home to their families where they came from.
And while they are here, you mentioned kind of the cost associated with that. I know the federal government will often, help offset those costs when private individuals and companies step in. Is someone going to be profiting off these kids being held here in Oklahoma, and who?
Well, I don't know that I would say profiting. I just know they have needs that have to be met, and whether it's through the regular federal government process or through contracting out to meet their needs, that's got to be done. We can't just let them go without. Again, it's not their fault they're here. There are issues on the border. That's part of why the president's worked so aggressively with our neighbors in Mexico to get them to agree to use the military forces, their National Guard, to make it difficult for people to cross from Central and South America and other foreign countries into southern Mexico so that they can then get to the United States border on the south. That's the real issue. What's going on where the kids came from? How are they able to get across from Mexico to get here? The children being in the United States is a symptom of bigger problems with our neighbor and with the rest of the region.
Yeah, you mentioned that deal with Mexico. The president seems very optimistic that that's going to help curb the flow of migrants across the border. Still has some ways to go before it's approved by lawmakers there in Mexico. Are you optimistic that that's going to make a real dent in the problem?
Yes, because I think the president used his existing tariff authority, and some may argue that he stretched his tariff authority to make this happen, but he used his existing tariff authority to get the Mexican national government's attention. The situation we had before was, why worry about them as they pass through the country? When they come in from the southern part of Mexico, let them go across Mexico, wind up in the United States. Why worry about it? Now the Mexican government understands they have an economic interest in this, that we will not continue to tolerate letting it just be a free flow of anyone who wants to come to the United States. So I give the Mexican government credit for working with the president. We'll now see how they can deliver on their promises. But something's got to happen, because the increased flow of not just children, but all illegals in the last month has been dramatically greater than any time since the Obama administration. This just cannot continue to happen.
Let's switch now from tariff threats against Mexico to Trump's latest threats with $300 billion in new tariffs against Chinese imports. I know, Congressman, you have a lot of farmers in your district, and this is something that they're very concerned about. What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, this needs to be over quickly, and that's my goal, as is every sorghum producer, every soybean producer, every hog producer in the 3rd District of Oklahoma. But remember, for the last 20, 30 years, the Chinese more frequently than not have sold us 2 or 3 times as much stuff as they purchased from us. So the status quo is shifting business and manufacturing from the United States to places like China. We're sending boatloads of money over there when we buy their goods and products, that they're building a strong industrial economy. Give the president credit. He's trying to rebalance the trading field. This is a once-in-a-lifetime situation. Some will argue, ultimately, that if consumer goods go up, temporarily, that's a terrible thing. I would simply note, if our industrial base leaves the country, if our jobs leave the country, it doesn't matter how cheap the goods are that are being shipped to the United States. If we don't have the money to buy anything, what's that do? We have to give the president the benefit of the doubt. He's making progress. He's succeeded in finishing an agreement with Mexico and Canada. Now Speaker Pelosi needs to let us vote on it in the United States House. That will drive the Japanese and the European Union, I think, to an agreement. And with those in place, we'll get the Chinese trade situation under control. More equitable, fair trade. You cannot forever buy 2 or 3 times as much stuff from your number one economic competitor as you sell them. It will continue to economically undercut and destroy us.
All right, Congressman Frank Lucas, thank you so much for your time today and speaking with us. Take care.